reading this morning is from an article in the New York Times science section back in December. Why our memory fails us. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist and host of the TV series Cosmos, regularly speaks to audiences on topics ranging from cosmology to climate change to the appalling state of science literacy in America. One of his staple stories hinges on a line from President George W. Bush's speech to Congress after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. In a 2008 talk, for example, Dr. Tyson said that in order to distinguish we from they, meaning to divide Judeo-Christian Americans from fundamentalist Muslims, Mr. Bush uttered the words, "Our God is the God who named the stars." Dr. Tyson implied that President Bush was prejudiced against Islam in order to make a broader point about scientific awareness. 2/3 of the named stars actually have Arabic names, given to them at a time when Muslims led the world in astronomy. And Mr. Bush might not have said what he did if he had known this fact. This is a powerful example of how our biases can blind us, but not in the way Dr. Tyson thought. Mr. Bush wasn't blinded by religious bigotry. Instead, Dr. Tyson was fooled by his faith in the accuracy of his own memory. In his post-9/11 speech, Mr. Bush actually said, "The enemy of America is not our many Muslim friends," and he said nothing about the stars. Mr. Bush had indeed once said something like what Dr. Tyson remembered. In 2003, Mr. Bush said, in tribute to the astronauts lost in the Columbia Space Shuttle explosion, that the, quote, "same creator who names the stars also knows the names of the 7 souls we mourn today," unquote. Critics pointed these facts out. Some accused Dr. Tyson of lying and argued that the episode should call into question his reliability as a scientist and a public advocate. When he was first asked for the source of Mr. Bush's quotation, Dr. Tyson insisted, "I have explicit memory of those words being spoken by the president. I reacted on the spot, making note for possible later reference in my public discourse. Odd that nobody seems to be able to find the quote anywhere," unquote. He then added, quote, "One of our mantras in science is that the absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence." That is how we all usually respond when our memory is challenged. We have an abstract understanding that people can remember the same event differently. The film Rashomon made this point more than 60 years ago. The Showtime series The Affair presents each episode from 2 conflicting viewpoints, and contradictory witness testimony is a crime drama trope. But when our own memories are challenged, we may neglect all this and instead respond emotionally, acting as though we must be right and everyone else must be wrong. Overconfidence in memory could emerge from our daily experience. We recall events easily and often, at least if they're important to us, but only rarely do we find our memories contradicted by evidence, much less take the initiative to check if they are right. We then rely on confidence as a signal of accuracy in ourselves and in others. It's no accident that Oprah Winfrey's latest bestseller is called "What I Know for Sure," rather than "Some Things That Might Be True." Our lack of appreciation for the fallibility of our own memories can lead to much bigger problems than a misattributed quote. Memory failures that resemble Dr. Tyson's mashup of distinct experiences have led to false convictions and even death sentences. Whose memories we believe and whose we disbelieve influence how we interpret controversial public events, as demonstrated most recently by the events in Ferguson, Missouri. Why memory fails us. The writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez said, "What matters in life is not what happens to you, but what you remember and how you remember it." Today is a day of commemoration. More than 500 UUs gathered in Selma, Alabama to bear witness to the 50th anniversary of a time which was pivotal in the history of freedom and justice in this country. I could not be there, but I want to take us there symbolically this morning. But before that, I want to share a few thoughts about what memory is and how reliable it is. Now, many of us are having profound memory issues with the onset of old age. And as I get older, I too have difficulty with remembering names of people or places or things. Alzheimer's and dementia are among us and with us, and we all wish they weren't. If I am true to my family history, I will probably get Alzheimer's before my life ends. But I have found with my own mother and other people I encounter with dementia that the old stories stay around. Mother could talk for hours about events that happened 50 years ago, but she hasn't a clue as to what happened an hour before. This morning, however, I want to talk about different memory issues, issues that affect people of all ages. To put it succinctly, modern psychology shows us that we all have the ability to remember things with great confidence that didn't happen the way we remember them. That's why that song was so perfect. And that sometimes the memories which are false are the ones in which we have the greatest confidence. Have you ever had this experience? You carry a story with you for years and years, retelling it when the occasion allows, and then you get back together with someone else who is part of that story, and the other person doesn't remember the way you do. There's a name for this little trick: confabulation, defined as, quote, the production of fabricated, distorted, or misinterpreted memories about oneself or the world without the conscious intention to deceive. We've had a lot of instances in the last few weeks of people remembering things that aren't so. Brian Williams is no longer the anchor of the NBC Nightly News because he admitted that the story he had told for years of being in a helicopter under enemy fire in Afghanistan wasn't true. He had been in a helicopter, but not the one that was fired upon. In a similar vein, Bill O'Reilly at Fox News made claims about being in the middle of the shooting war in the Falklands, which was debunked, and more clearly is claimed in a book that he witnessed the suicide of one George de Morenschildt, a friend of JFK assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. O'Reilly said he was standing on the front porch of the house, knocking at the door when he heard the gun go off inside. But his colleagues say he was in Dallas, while the suicide took place in Florida. Unlike NBC, however, Fox has taken no disciplinary action against their star TV personality, and not a few have commented on this as a difference in journalistic standards between the two networks. Now, the blogosphere has erupted over these two public figures, in part because they are people who are relied on to get the story straight. And the assumption has been that they are consciously lying. But maybe their memory mistake started out as confabulation and only got into deception as they hunkered down to defend its veracity. Of more central importance, consider the U.S. Justice Department's recent report on the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, which found systemic racism in the Ferguson Police Department, but exonerated Officer Wilson in the actual shooting of Brown. For months, the rallying cry of protesters across this nation has been, hands up, don't shoot. It has achieved the status of a meme. It has gone viral. You see the hands up gesture from football players to state legislators and even some ministers. But the Justice Department report found that the witnesses who testified that Brown had his hands raised were not credible. Quote, although there are several individuals who have stated that Brown held up his hands in an unambiguous sign of surrender prior to Wilson shooting him dead, their accounts do not support a prosecution of Wilson, unquote. The report goes on to detail why this is so. Some of these accounts are inconsistent with the physical evidence, some are inconsistent with the witness's own prior statements, and in some cases the witness has recanted, admitting that they did not actually witness the shooting, despite what they had said earlier to the media. There's been sort of a media feeding frenzy on this case, as you may know. Of course, this is not the same as Brian Williams or Bill O'Reilly's individual failure of memory. This is an analysis of the credibility of all the known evidence in the case, but it's still based on the fallibility of memory. We who believe that Black Lives Matter, and I count myself definitely among that group, may continue to proclaim that truth, but we need to back off the specific claim as to Michael Brown and the hands-up gesture that has accompanied it. The article I read from a moment ago was in the New York Times Weekly Science section in early December. It is one of the high points of my week to read that section on Tuesday morning. The authors of the article, Christopher S. Chabris, a psychology professor at Union College, and Daniel J. Simmons, a psychology professor at the University of Illinois, are also the authors of a recent book called The Invisible Gorilla: How Our Intuitions Deceive Us. Incidentally, that book title refers to a psychology experiment on attention, where the subjects are given the task of watching a group of 6 people. You can get this on YouTube, you can get the actual video, passing a couple of basketballs around a room. Half the people have white shirts and half the people have black shirts. The instructions ask you to count how many times the team in black passes the ball. It's all happening very quickly, which means that you have to focus on half of the people moving in the scene and filter out the movements of the other half. In the middle of the action, a guy in a gorilla suit walks through the middle of the basketball passes and out to the other side. A very high percentage of people taking this test, paying close attention to counting the ball passes, don't see the gorilla. Why is accuracy of memory important? Well, where to begin? Our 4th UU principle commits us to affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We decide who to marry. We decide whether to go to war, where to live, what job to take. We decide who is guilty and who is innocent, who gets locked up and who goes free, based on accounts of what happened, drawn from the memories of people. Eyewitness testimony is a particularly crucial area. And as a practicing lawyer, I spend a lot of my creative energy figuring out ways to test the accuracy of memory of witnesses, which might sway a judge or jury for or against my client. In recent years, the shortcomings of eyewitness identification, that's the man I saw last night, have been brought into focus by cases in which the DNA evidence exonerated a prisoner who had been convicted on the basis of eyewitness testimony, sometimes after years and years of a prison sentence served. This has now led to a study by a panel of the National Academy of Sciences to summarize what is known scientifically about memory in order to make recommendations to the legal system. The report came out in October of 2014. One of the authors of the New York Times article, Simons, was on the panel which wrote this report. The report breaks down the components of perception and memory. Here's an example describing a typical criminal witness encounter you might see in any courtroom on any day of the week. Quote, while returning home late, you hear a muffled scream from around the street corner. Seconds later, you come face to face with a man turning the corner and moving swiftly past you. Instantaneously, properties of the scene are conveyed to you through patterns of light cast on the backs of your eyes and sensed by photoreceptors in your retina. Only a fraction of the information sensed is selected for further processing. In this case, you focus your attention on certain features of the man's face. Those features are integrated and interpreted to yield a coherent percept of the man. As you round the corner, you perceive, though through an identical process, the victim slumped lifelessly against the wall. You quickly grasp the meaning of these perceptual experiences, and they immediately elicit both cognitive and visceral components, that is, increased heart rate, of fear and anxiety. Your percepts are initially encoded in short-term working memory, where content is limited and labile. Your elevated level of arousal may cause interference and some loss of content. But with time and recognition of the importance of the experience, your percepts are consolidated into long-term memory. Long-term memories are maintained in storage, but subject to ongoing updates and modifications resulting from new experiences and perhaps distortions caused by sustained levels of stress, unquote. That's from this report by the National Academy of Sciences. In short, a human brain is not like a camera. A camera records all the light falling on it within the scope of the frame, but only a fraction of the light falling on your retina will make it to the brain. And the only part of that which might make it further is governed by your attention, which might be narrowed if you're under stress. And then you try to process the information and make sense of it, and only that which can be made to make sense will actually enter into the memory. If you think about it, it's amazing that the witness in this scenario could remember any details at all about this sudden encounter. She or he only saw the supposed perpetrator for a few seconds, and that was before she or he realized that a crime had been committed. So in the process of putting experience into memory, there's a great selection going on. And then when the memory is retrieved, there's a further selection going on. Chabry and Simons in the New York Times article put it this way, quote, "When we recall our own memories, we are not extracting a perfect record of our experiences and playing it back verbatim. Most people believe that memory works this way, but it doesn't. Instead, we are effectively whispering a message from our past to our present. Whispering a message from our past to our present. Reconstructing it on the fly each time. We get a lot of details right, but when our memories change, we only hear the most recent version of the message, and we may assume that what we believe now is what we always believed. Studies find that even our flashbulb memories of emotionally charged events can be distorted and inaccurate, but we cling to them with the greatest of confidence," unquote. So retrieving a memory is not like going to your video library and taking down a recording and putting it in the machine. It is retelling the story based in part on the original facts and in large part on how you told the story the last time you remembered it. And the most startling fact brought up by the Times article is that our confidence in the accuracy of our memory does not actually correlate with accuracy. Psychological tests confirm that we can have great confidence in memories of things that didn't happen. Neil deGrasse Tyson's mistaken memory about what President Bush said is the example on which this article is hung. And the article's authors point out that Tyson, who is first and foremost a scientist, eventually realized that he was mistaken and admitted it, because after all, what you train yourself for in science is to be open to the possibility that other theories, other data may not conform to your theory. By the point that he did admit it, some commentators had said he was lying, but the authors say this is not accurate, for he honestly believed that his memory was correct. So between giving an accurate account and deliberately lying, there's a large gray area where mistakes happen, and that's what we call confabulation. It is quite common to have a motive in a memory, and our motive will sway the memory. Tyson's motive was that he wanted to preserve a teaching moment about President Bush in order to remind the public that the Arabs had made significant contributions to astronomy. What I take from this excursion into psychology of memory and perception is that it behooves all of us to be humble, skeptical, and open-minded about what we think we remember. Some UU churches recite an affirmation every Sunday that the quest for truth is our sacrament, not the attaining of truth, the quest. What is holy is the refinement of our approximations of truth as they are tested by physical facts and by the recollections of others. We engaged in a collective act of memory this weekend. The word commemorate means to remember together. 50 years ago yesterday, a group of marchers set out to march from Selma to Birmingham to demand their right to vote. They were met with police violence on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, what we call Bloody Sunday. As President Obama said yesterday, we gather here to celebrate them. We gather here to honor the courage of ordinary Americans, willing to endure billy clubs and the chastening rod, tear gas and the trampling hoof. Men and women who, despite the gush of blood and splintered bone, would stay true to their North Star and keep marching toward justice, unquote. I recommend to you all that you take a few minutes sometime soon to read the full text of the president's remarks. His speech is longer than Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, but it has a resemblance to it, which I'm sure is no accident. It seeks to define our nation by what it has been through and the ideals on which it was founded. As I've noted with respect to the Gettysburg Address, this is pure transcendentalism. Pure justice, the overcoming of racism and other oppressions, is an ideal that beckons us on. The beloved community has not arrived, but neither are we back where we were 50 years ago. We have competing visions for America, and President Obama beautifully articulated the progressive vision yesterday. Quote, "What they did here will reverberate through the ages, not because the change they won was preordained, not because their victory was complete, but because they proved that nonviolent change is possible, that love and hope can conquer hate." These are words the nation sorely needed to hear. Amen.